positive atheism is true, my bad, in virtue of there being a contradiction in God existing.
What is the contradiction in Yahweh existing?
Yeah, specifically that he would have to know a completed set of all true propositions, and it's impossible to know a completed set of all true propositions. Have you ever heard of Grimm's argument using Cantor's theorem?
Hold on. No, I don't. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah. So, Pat, when you finish writing that down, I'll explain it to you real quick.
You would have to know a completed set of propositions?
Yeah, you'd have to know a completed set of propositions, and it's impossible to know a completed set of propositions.
And the impossibility is a logical impossibility?
Yep.
Okay.
Also,
Right.
what are you writing it down?
So
Sorry.
So tell me what you were saying.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. I dropped something. What'd you say?
You were going to say something about Hegel. I think you said Hegel.
No, I don't want to go on like a whole yap fest about continental philosophy, but I was going to ask really quickly, do you believe that if everything is necessary, right, God can know something that isn't actualized?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you think a condition of knowledge is truth?
A condition of knowledge is truth. When yeah. When it comes on to justify true belief, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So then is it true that there exists an unactualized state of affairs?
No.
No, okay. Okay, so it is the case that a condition of truth, a condition of knowledge is truth. It is the case that God knows that he knows a state of affairs which is not actualized, but it is not true that there exists an unactualized state of affairs.
Wait, say that again.
Yeah, so the first thing, right, a condition of knowledge is truth. The second thing, God knows that there's an unactualized state of affairs, and then therefore there should, in theory, exist an unactualized state of affairs.
Okay, so the should is where I would disagree, in that by God knowing an unactualized state of affairs, it should exist. In our worldview, we don't say that God knowing a counterfactual necessitates that the counterfactual would exist. It simply means that God knows what would have happened if we had chosen a different route, or if he had decreed that we chose a different route. It does not necessitate that the thing would exist or be actualized.
Yeah, I'm saying it would exist as a possibility. I'm not saying it would exist in the actual, but it would just exist as a possibility. Like, brief example is, it's obviously possible that you're not on live and you're eating like an apple right now, right? But of course, if everything is necessary, that's not possible. So I can't know.
Limitation in God. It would be to commit the unification error by identifying a human being with God himself. What God can know, we can know is totally different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this would be like a logical contradiction. I don't think it would just be inside of the mind. So here, maybe I can like see if I can formalize it really quickly. So premise one, for all states of affairs which an agent has knowledge about, it is necessary that the state of affairs which the agent has knowledge about is true, or the proposition that they have knowledge about comes out is true.
I think that premise would only be applicable to human beings, and that we have a limitation that would entail a contradiction to know a state of affairs that is true but is also false at the same time.
Yeah, can God know something and that thing not be true?
Can God know something and that thing not be true? God can know something and it not be actualized is what I would say to that. But God knows something and it not be true. I would say that God can know a false proposition. It's not possible to know a false proposition.
God can know a false proposition. So the proposition,
Yeah,
God can. Sorry, what?
God can know a lie. A lie is a false proposition.
Yeah, but he can't know that the proposition is true. Right, that's specifically what we're talking about when we come to omniscience, is that he knows all true propositions and he knows all false propositions. So what I'm talking about now is like, for any knowledge that we have, it's necessary that the proposition is true and not false, right? God has knowledge about non-actualized propositions. So then, therefore, the non-actualized propositions would have to be true in some respect. But of course, that's a Sorry, what?
Actually, how we can you turn that off? Turn it off. What I'm pointing out is from within Christian theology to say that God knows all true propositions. I'm a Calvinist. We make a very, very important qualification. God knows what he decrees perfectly, and what he decrees are the propositions and all the state of affairs that take place in human history and human time. So God knowing those things are in virtue of him decreeing those things. And when we say God can know other things, we're talking about God knows himself and knows what he could have done otherwise if he had decided to do things otherwise. But
Yeah.
to say that what God has actualized, it is possible for God to have actualized something else would be to say that it is both necessary and not necessary, which would create a contradiction. That's the contradiction that we're pointing out is not being affirmed by the Christian religion or Christian worldview.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you just said, so God, the reasons as to why he perfectly knows all things is because he himself decreed it, and the reason as to why he can know counterfactuals is through the self-reflection of his own choices, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So God can know, so there could be a state of affairs which is true that God himself did not decree.
There can be a state of affairs that God knows that he did not actualize, is what we say. Not decree, but actualize.
Okay. So then when you say like God knows a possible state of affairs, like example, the Apple thing that we were talking about, what does that mean?
The Apple what?
Like the Apple scenario that we were talking about, like it's possible, of course, that the proposition you're eating an apple right now is true. That if God says that, hypothetically, of course, like God knows that you're not eating an apple, but it's possible that you are eating an apple. When he says that proposition, what does it mean for him to have knowledge about that possible state of affairs?
All right. So what it means is that we make a distinction between the categorical ability to do otherwise and the conditional ability to do otherwise, which is that could it have been the case that I did not eat the apple versus me eating the apple? So what we say in our theology as Christians that completely destroys the contradiction that could be, accused on us is that God's decree is what God has decreed is necessary. And if God decreed that I eat the apple, it is necessary that I eat the apple. But is it possible for me to not have eaten the apple? That would be categorical ability, which is to say that all things being equal, God's decree included, we could have still done otherwise, which would contradict the necessity of God's decree. But in the other scenario, which is conditional ability, if I had desired to not eat the apple, I could have not eaten the apple, but my desire was decreed by God as well, which would make it impossible for me to have done otherwise. So God can know what would have happened if I did not eat the apple, but what is necessary is that I eat the apple, and what is necessitated is what God has decreed. So that's how God knows all things.
Yeah, I just want to be, I don't think we're using the same sense of necessary. Like, I just want to be, whenever I say necessary, I mean that in every single quote unquote possible world that must obtain. Right? Do you agree with this definition of necessity?
Say it again, the definition of necessity. Say it again.
Yeah, necessity just means that it is actualized in every possible state of affairs.
No, I actually don't think we're using it the same way, because actualized in every possible state of affairs would be actualized in every possible world, right?
It depends on how you take possible worlds to be, of course, but yeah.
I don't think we're using it the same way.
Okay, then what do you mean by necessity? So, like, for example, let's say God necessarily exists. What does that mean?
When I say necessary, I mean everything that happens in this world is necessitated by the decree of God, in that it could not have been otherwise because it is necessitated by the decree of God. That's what I mean by necessary. I think I'm using necessary without falling in the category of philosophical definitions. I think that's where the problem is, in that there are theological definitions for things, and those are within two different disciplines. So that's where the confusion is. In that you sound like you probably studied philosophy a lot. I've only been studying philosophy for a year now, And there are certain things that I hold to in philosophy, in theology, that are not grounded in philosophy with reference to their nomenclature and how they define things.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. You just said that what it means to be necessary is that it could not fail to obtain in virtue of like God wanting or willing that thing, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. When you said cannot be otherwise, you're saying that there's a contradiction in it being that way, that like isn't the state of affairs which God actualized?
No, I would say that it could not be otherwise in virtue of God's decree being certain and God's decree being necessitated in the created order and the created world. It's like an author writing a story. Everything that happens in the story is necessitated in virtue of the story having been written. Nothing can be changed, nothing can be altered, etc.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I just didn't ask like the question right. So like whenever you say, let's say for example, God wills that you eat this apple, right? The fact that you will the apple is now necessary, right? Which means that you could have not failed to eat the apple, right? So then that means that in every state of affairs, whether it's only this state of affair or there's other like counterfactual states of affairs, right? Whatever those are, you must necessarily eat the apple. And if you don't eat the apple, there's a contradiction in that world, correct?
There's the contradiction would be in the doctrine that states that it's necessary by virtue of God's decree that you eat the apple, and then saying it's not necessary because it's possible for you to not eat the apple.
I was just wondering, is the statement that I said true? Like that in your worldview, if God wills something, the thing that he wills becomes necessary, and then that means that the thing in which he wills cannot fail to obtain in any possible world?
No, I would say that it could not fail to obtain in this world that he has actualized. And all the other worlds or possible word semantics that we all use, those are possibilities that we can conceptualize in our mind, but conceptualization does not equate to actuality.
Yeah, that's fine. So then, like, whenever God said, if God says something like, you must eat the apple, right? Is it possible that that thing isn't actualized?
No, it's not possible that thing is not actualized because it is God who has created the state of affairs of the eating of the apple, which is grounded in his decree, and his decree is all of what takes place in reality itself, every evil action, every good action, etc. So everything is necessitated by his decree, and to say it's not is to both affirm A and not A, which is a contradiction.
Okay, so then if God wills you eat an apple, it must logically necessarily be true that that you always eat that apple. So then anything that God does is logically necessarily true, right?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay, so then if God knows a proposition that isn't actualized in this state of affairs, would you say that there's a contradiction there?
If God knows a proposition that is not actualized, would that be a contradiction? Bro, that is a very good question. Hold on, let me write it down. Wait. If God knows a state of affairs that is not actualized, would that be a contradiction, right?
Yep.
Can you lay out for me what the P and not P would look like in that question?
Well, I don't think that there is a contradiction, but I think if in your worldview there is, maybe I can like explain the reasoning there.
No, I mean from within my worldview, what would the P and not P look like?
Yeah. So the first premise or the proposition, Jesus Christ, I can't speak, would be that for any state of affairs, God knows it must be the case that that state of affairs is actualized, given the fact that a condition of knowledge is truth. So an example is if God knows that you're eating an apple right now, that proposition is true, right? And then the other thing that you said is that God can know things which are not actualized, which means that God can know a true proposition that isn't actualized.
Okay. I think I get it. Okay, and I have this on recording. I don't have an answer for that. That's the first time I heard a question like that. So I'm gonna have to actually backtrack and go back to my studies and see what the literature on this particular question is, and get an answer because I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm actually also kind of interested in talking about the transcendental argument because I posted something a little bit ago. We're trying to refute the transcendental argument. I wanted to talk to you about it.
Did you hear my full argument?
Correct me if I'm wrong. It was just saying that intelligibility requires an ultimate ground. No, if intelligibility exists, it requires an ultimate ground. P2 is just affirming the antecedent, and then therefore intelligibility requires an ultimate ground. The only ultimate ground is like Yahweh or something, and then therefore Yahweh would exist, right?
And the conclusion would necessarily follow that Yahweh exists.
Okay.
That's what the argument was. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're like well read up on like continental philosophy, but have you ever heard of? I don't know if he's a continental or analytic. I don't know, but have you ever heard of people like Robert Brandom? They're like neo-Hegelians.
No, I haven't. Wait a minute. Before you continue, are you Ian?
No, I get that a lot though. I'm not Ian.
You sound a lot like Ian, bro. I'm not gonna lie. It's no problem if you're Ian, but I just wanted to know if you were Ian.
No, I get that a lot though, man. Don't worry.
Thigh.
Yeah, what's up?
You pointed out something that I need to go study. I never heard that question before, and you know what? I'm gonna give you 5 more minutes to tell me what you think the problem is with my argument, and I'll see if I can look into that as well. What's the problem with the argument? What would you say the problem is?
Yeah, well, the contention is, I think, just P3, and the reason as to why I think it's false is because have you ever heard of something called the space of reasons?
No, I haven't.
No, okay, so just to really summarize it up without getting like too deep into it, the space of reasons is just the conditions that allow for discourse and propositions to even be possible. So like a brief example, of course, right? For any proposition to be possible, it must be the case that I can justify that proposition. Because if it wasn't the case, like for example, let's say I make a proposition that you're eating an apple. If I cannot justify that proposition, it's impossible for me to know if that is true, which means that the proposition I made is kind of gibberish. So then that means that there must exist like analytical categories of any proposition being true. And I think we can derive just from this. We take this very basic thing that for any proposition, there exist analytical categories that allow for that proposition to be true. I think we can derive things like logic. We can derive things like intelligibility of reality. We can derive all of this just from the very basic principle of necessity about propositions.
But isn't that another way of saying that these things in the space of reasons just are? They're brute facts?
No, I'm saying that they're derivable. So the necessity of them is derivable from the very fact that it's possible to make a proposition.
Okay, so the possibility to make a proposition, those things in the space of reason are derived from that. But where are those things in the space of reason derived from for their very existence that we're using to, make propositions?
Are you asking me like where the analytical categories are derived from?
Yeah. What is the grounding for them?
I think that's just a confused question. I don't know what it would mean to ground like the analytical categories of discourse.
Yeah, I would say what caused them? What caused them to exist?
Well, nothing. They're abstract objects. They always exist. It's kind of like if I asked you why God exists, of course.
Wait, what did you say about God?
Yeah, I mean, the question that you just asked me is kind of like if I asked you the really nonsensical question, what caused God to exist, right?
Well, actually, I don't think that it would be a bad question to ask what caused God to exist. We would answer that question by saying God is the necessary being. But would you say that these analytical abstract concepts are necessary beings?
They're not necessary beings, and it depends on how you cash out being, of course. But I think they're necessary like principles and rules that govern over like all states of affairs of reality.
And would you say that these necessary principles have no reason for why they exist?
If you're saying external reason, right? I guess the reasons as to why we know that it depends. Are you saying like epistemic reasons as to why we know they exist, or ontological reasons?
External reason for why they exist.
Yeah,
a reason outside of themselves. That makes
okay, sense. So you're talking about ontological reasons. So like maybe grounding relations, but as to why they exist.
Yeah, ontological reason. What would you say the ontological reason is for their existence?
I mean, I don't think there can be an ontological reason as to why they exist.
So you would say they're necessary.
No. A brute fact is saying that something comes into existence with no reasons as to why they exist. So, like example is, I'm sure you've had a bunch of atheists that say something like, the universe just came into existence, right? There's no reason for it. all of this, right? But when we say this, like the same way that whenever you say God isn't a brute fact because he's necessary, he cannot fail to exist in any world, we just say the same thing, but with the analytical categories of discourse, right? They cannot fail to exist.
Analytical categories. Categories. What are those analytical categories?
Yeah, I don't know like all of them off the top of my head, but there's a couple.
Like three of them.
Yeah. So there's like the metaphysical principles of existence. Like I'm a neo-Carnapian, we can get into that later. There's logic, which is just to say that there's like governing rules over reality and law and like propositions. Because if there wasn't, then of course things like the law of non-contradiction you can hold in propositions, and that would mean that the proposition itself becomes impossible. Then there's things like justifiability about propositions. So like the way that I can, sorry, what?
Okay, I get it. I'm writing it down. Justifiability of propositions. Okay,
Yeah.
so these are analytical categories that you would say are necessary, and you wouldn't ask questions about necessary things as to what grounds them, right?
Yeah, I think that's like a kind of an incoherent statement to ask like what grounds a necessary thing.
How do we? But how do we know that they're necessary? Like,
Yeah,
what would be the epistemic justification for why they're necessary?
Yeah, because in any possible state of affairs, right, the possible state of affairs, we have to know about the possible state of affairs. And in the very act of knowing about that possible state of affairs, we have to employ the analytical categories of discourse in that propositional state of affairs.
So we would have to presuppose them.
Yeah. We'd have to presuppose them for the very act of claiming that there is any possible world, or any act of existing, period, would automatically presuppose all of these. Right, so here, maybe I like explain this terribly, but what I'm saying, the reasons as to why we know that they exist, right? So what we derive them from, so the epistemic grounding is just we derive them from the very categories of propositions, but the reasons that they must exist in any possible world is insofar as to claim that they exist is to make like synthetical claims about reality, and to say that is to employ these things over the states of affairs which we're like making propositions about.
So it would be like a fallacy of retortion to deny any of them.
Let me look up what that is. I don't want to like sound stupid.
Oh, you don't sound stupid, man. I think I'm the stupid one here right now.
No, you're
not stupid, just ignorant. I don't know any of what you're talking about, but I'm gonna know within 48 hours. I'm gonna be studying these things. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah. I just looked it up. Yeah, it would be like a self-defeating claim to deny any of these, insofar as you must claim them to be true in order to make the proposition.
Yeah. I've only been studying philosophy for like a year now, man. So I still have some gaps in my knowledge. You pointed out some of those gaps, and I appreciate you for that. We'll talk again on this. I'm gonna be looking into this.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, man. Hope you have a good rest of life.
Yeah, bro. I always try to have good conversations, man. Never try to start out disrespectful, but things get heated sometimes. But I appreciate learning new things. Thank you for coming up.
Yeah,
give me a follow. We're gonna definitely talk again, man.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should say God bless you, but you get what I'm saying. I don't know any other way to.
Hey, thank you, bro. God bless you too.
All right, see you, man.
Wow, that was a good conversation.